The city was alive with its usual chaos. Cars honked impatiently, their drivers gripping the steering wheel as if it might somehow make the traffic move faster. Pedestrians hurried along the sidewalks, their faces buried in phones or lost in thought. The air smelled faintly of coffee from nearby cafes mixed with the exhaust fumes of endless vehicles. Amid all this noise and movement, Daniel Harper walked briskly down the street, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his worn leather jacket. He wasn't in a hurry, he rarely was, but today felt different. There was an unexplainable energy buzzing around him like something important was about to happen. Daniel had spent most of his adult life chasing dreams that seemed just out of reach. A freelance graphic designer by trade, he poured his heart into every project, creating art that spoke to people's emotions. But despite his talent, money always seemed to slip through his fingers. Bills piled up faster than he could pay them, and his tiny apartment often felt more like a prison than a home. Still, Daniel refused to let bitterness take root. Instead, he carried himself with quiet optimism, choosing to believe that things would eventually fall into place. As he approached the bus stop on Fifth Avenue, Daniel slowed his pace. A crowd had gathered there, waiting for the next bus to arrive. Most stood silently, staring at their phones or glancing occasionally at their watches. But one figure caught his eye, a woman standing slightly apart from the others. She looked out of place among the sea of commuters. Her clothes were simple, yet stylish: dark jeans, a cozy sweater, and boots that looked practical but still chic. Her hair cascaded over her shoulders in soft waves, framing a face that radiated calmness even amidst the bustling surroundings. Something about her demeanor intrigued Daniel. While everyone else seemed glued to their devices, she appeared distracted, almost flustered. She kept rummaging through her bag, muttering under her breath. At first, Daniel thought maybe she'd misplaced her phone or forgotten her headphones, common enough occurrences in this digital age. But as he drew closer, he realized what was really going on. When the bus finally pulled up to the curb with a loud hiss, she hesitated, biting her lip nervously. Then, after a brief internal struggle, she stepped forward toward the driver. "I'm so sorry," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. "I think I left my wallet at home." The driver gave her a skeptical look. "No cash, no ride," he replied curtly before closing the doors and pulling away. The woman sighed deeply, shaking her head as though scolding herself for such a careless mistake. She glanced around, perhaps hoping someone might offer assistance, but no one paid her any attention. Everyone else was too consumed with their own lives to notice her predicament. Daniel watched the scene unfold, feeling a pang of sympathy. He didn't know why, but seeing her stand there stranded and embarrassed stirred something inside him. Maybe it was because he understood what it felt like to be overlooked, to feel invisible in a world that moved too fast to care. Or maybe it was simply the kindness ingrained in him since childhood, taught by parents who believed in helping others whenever possible. Whatever the reason, Daniel found himself walking toward her before he could second-guess the decision. "Excuse me," he said gently, catching her attention. She turned to face him, surprise flickering across her features. Up close, he noticed how strikingly beautiful she was, not in a flashy, magazine cover kind of way, but in a natural, understated manner. Her eyes held warmth and intelligence, and her smile, though tentative now, hinted at a brightness beneath the surface. "Hi," she replied, her tone polite but guarded. Clearly she wasn't used to strangers approaching her like this. "I couldn't help but overhear," Daniel continued, gesturing vaguely toward the departing bus. "If you need it, I can cover your fare. It's no big deal." For a moment, she just stared at him, as if trying to determine whether he had ulterior motives. People in the city weren't exactly known for random acts of kindness, especially not between complete strangers. But when she saw the sincerity in his expression, her defenses melted away. "That's incredibly kind of you," she said, relief washing over her face. "Are you sure? I don't want to inconvenience you." "It's fine, really," Daniel assured her, pulling a crumpled $5 bill from his pocket. "Consider it good karma." She accepted the money with gratitude, her fingers brushing against his briefly as she took it. The contact sent a small jolt through both of them, though neither acknowledged it. "Thank you so much," she said earnestly. "You have no idea how much this means to me. I'll pay you back, I promise." Daniel waved off her concern. "Don't worry about it. Just pay it forward someday, okay?" She nodded, smiling brightly now. "I will. And thank you again. You've restored my faith in humanity." With that, she turned and boarded the next arriving bus, disappearing into the crowd of passengers. Daniel lingered for a moment, watching until the bus drove out of sight. Only then did he realize he hadn't even asked her name. Oddly, it didn't bother him as much as he thought it would. Something about the encounter left him feeling lighter, as though he'd done exactly what he was meant to do today. Little did Daniel know, the woman he'd helped was far from ordinary. Beneath her unassuming exterior lay a life of extraordinary success and responsibility. She was Evelyn Carter, a self-made millionaire and CEO of a cutting-edge tech company whose innovations had revolutionized industries worldwide. Yet none of that mattered to Daniel when he handed her the money. To him, she was simply someone in need, a fellow human being deserving of compassion. And while Daniel returned to his daily routine, unaware of the ripple effect his small act of kindness would create, Evelyn sat quietly on the bus, replaying the moment in her mind. She couldn't shake the image of his gentle smile or the genuine concern in his eyes. In a world where transactions ruled and relationships often felt calculated, Daniel's gesture stood out like a beacon of authenticity. For reasons she couldn't quite explain, she knew she wouldn't forget him anytime soon. Evelyn sat in the back seat of her sleek black car, staring out the window as the city blurred past. Her mind kept drifting back to the man at the bus stop, the one who had given her money without hesitation. She couldn't stop thinking about him. His kindness had been so pure, so unexpected. In her world, people rarely did things without expecting something in return. Deals were struck, favors exchanged, and relationships often came with strings attached. But Daniel? He hadn't asked for anything. Not a name, not gratitude beyond a simple smile. He just gave because he could. The memory of his face lingered in her thoughts. There was something about him that felt different. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, calm and unassuming. Or maybe it was the sincerity in his voice when he told her not to worry about paying him back. Whatever it was, Evelyn found herself replaying their brief interaction over and over again. It wasn't just curiosity gnawing at her. It was admiration. For the first time in years, someone had reminded her of what true humanity looked like. But Evelyn wasn't the type to sit around wondering. If there was one thing she excelled at, it was taking action. So, later that evening, after wrapping up a long day of meetings, she called Marcus, her trusted private investigator. Marcus had worked for her for years, discreetly handling everything from corporate espionage cases to personal matters. He knew better than to ask questions when Evelyn requested his services, but this assignment was unusual even by his standards. "I need you to find someone," Evelyn said, leaning back in her office chair. The room was dimly lit, the soft glow of her desk lamp casting shadows across stacks of documents and sleek gadgets. "A man I met today. He's ordinary, but extraordinary at the same time." Marcus raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. Instead, he pulled out his notebook and pen, ready to jot down details. "Do you have a name?" "No," Evelyn admitted. "But I can describe him. Mid-30s, maybe early 40s. Wearing a leather jacket, jeans, and sneakers. Brown hair, kind eyes. Oh, and he's a graphic designer, I think. Freelance, probably." "That's not much to go on," Marcus said dryly, though his tone held no judgment. "Any idea where I should start looking?" "He mentioned paying it forward," Evelyn said thoughtfully. "He seemed like the artistic type, someone who values creativity. Check local galleries, coffee shops, or anywhere artists might hang out, and—" She hesitated, unsure if she wanted to reveal too much. "He gave me money for the bus earlier. Today, near 5th Avenue. Marcus nodded, jotting down notes. "Got it. Anything else?" Evelyn shook her head. "That's all I know. Just be discreet, okay? I don't want him to feel like he's being hunted." Marcus smirked faintly. Discretion is my middle name. Over the next few days, Evelyn threw herself into work, trying to distract herself from thoughts of the mysterious stranger. She attended board meetings, negotiated contracts, and fielded calls from investors, all while maintaining the polished exterior everyone expected of her. But no matter how busy she stayed, her mind kept wandering back to Daniel. Who was he? What was his story? Why had his small act of kindness left such a lasting impression? Meanwhile, Marcus got to work. Using Evelyn's description and the location, near Fifth Avenue, he scoured social media profiles, artist directories, and community bulletin boards. It didn't take long for him to piece together a profile of Daniel Harper. He learned that Daniel was indeed a freelance graphic designer, known for his vivid illustrations and unique style. His work had been featured in several small galleries and online platforms, though he hadn't achieved widespread recognition yet. Marcus also discovered that Daniel lived in a modest apartment downtown and frequented a cozy cafe called the Canvas Corner, where he often sketched while sipping coffee. When Marcus presented his findings to Evelyn, she listened intently, absorbing every detail. Daniel's life sounded almost poetic in its simplicity. Unlike hers, filled with constant pressure and high stakes, his days revolved around creating art and finding joy in the little things. He struggled financially, yes, but there was a sense of freedom in his choices, a willingness to prioritize passion over profit. Evelyn envied that. "Thank you, Marcus," she said once he finished his report. "This is exactly what I needed." Marcus gave her a curious look. "If you don't mind me asking, why are you so interested in this guy? You've never gone to these lengths for anyone before." Evelyn hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Let's just say he reminded me of something important, something I've forgotten along the way." Satisfied with the answer, or at least pretending to be, Marcus left, leaving Evelyn alone with her thoughts. As she flipped through the folder Marcus had prepared, she felt a strange mix of excitement and apprehension. Now that she knew more about Daniel, she couldn't ignore the urge to see him again. But how? Walking up to him and saying, "Hi, remember me from the bus stop?" felt awkward and forced. No, she needed a better plan, a way to cross paths naturally, without raising suspicion. Her opportunity came sooner than expected. While browsing through Marcus's notes, Evelyn noticed that Daniel's artwork was scheduled to appear in a group exhibition at a local gallery. Perfect. Galleries were public spaces, after all. Attending the event wouldn't raise any eyebrows, and it would give her a chance to observe him in his element. With that in mind, Evelyn marked the date on her calendar and began preparing for what she hoped would be their second meeting. On the night of the exhibition, Evelyn arrived dressed casually, in jeans and a sweater, to blend in with the crowd. She tied her hair back into a loose ponytail and wore minimal makeup, wanting to appear approachable rather than intimidating. As she stepped inside the gallery, she immediately spotted Daniel. He stood near the far wall, chatting animatedly with a group of visitors. His body language was open and inviting, his hands gesturing as he explained the inspiration behind one of his pieces. Evelyn wandered closer, pretending to admire the artwork displayed nearby. From her vantage point, she studied him closely. Up close, he looked even more handsome than she remembered. There was a quiet confidence about him, a sense that he knew who he was and didn't feel the need to prove it to anyone. Watching him interact with others, Evelyn realized he had a natural charm, a way of making people feel seen and valued. Finally, gathering her courage, she approached him. "Excuse me," she said softly, interrupting his conversation. He turned to face her. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed quickly by confusion. "Do I know you?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. Evelyn smiled, feeling a flutter of nerves. "We met briefly a few weeks ago, at a bus stop. You helped me out, with some change for the fare." Realization dawned on Daniel's face and he chuckled. "Oh, right. How could I forget? You promised to pay me back." "Well, technically you told me not to worry about it," Evelyn teased, holding out her hand. "But since we're here, let's call it even." My name's Evie, by the way. Daniel, he replied, shaking her hand firmly. Nice to officially meet you, Evie. They fell into easy conversation, discussing the artwork on display and sharing stories about their lives. Evelyn made sure to keep the topic light, avoiding anything too personal. She didn't want to overwhelm him or give away too much too soon. For his part, Daniel seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her. He asked thoughtful questions and listened intently to her answers, making her feel like the most important person in the room. By the end of the evening, they had exchanged numbers and made vague plans to meet again. As Evelyn walked back to her car, she felt a spark of hope ignite within her. Finding Daniel had been a leap of faith, driven by curiosity and instinct. But now, standing on the brink of something new, she wondered if fate had brought them together for a reason. Only time would tell. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and Evelyn, or Evie as she introduced herself, began meeting regularly. Their encounters started casually enough, a coffee here, a walk through the park there. But soon, these small moments turned into something more meaningful. They discovered they had an uncanny ability to connect on almost every level. Conversations flowed effortlessly between them, ranging from lighthearted banter about their favorite movies to deeper discussions about life, dreams, and even fears. For Daniel, spending time with Evie felt like stepping into a world he'd never known existed. She was different from anyone he'd ever met. There was a quiet sophistication about her, but it wasn't off-putting or pretentious. It was magnetic. She listened intently when he spoke, her eyes locking onto his as if nothing else mattered in that moment. And yet, despite her polished demeanor, she carried an air of vulnerability, as though she too was searching for something elusive in life. Evie, on the other hand, found herself drawn to Daniel's authenticity. In a world where people often wore masks to protect themselves, Daniel seemed refreshingly real. He didn't try to impress her or pretend to be someone he wasn't. Instead, he embraced his quirks and passions openly, whether it was sketching, random strangers at cafes, or passionately explaining why vintage vinyl records sounded better than modern digital music. His enthusiasm was contagious, and Evie found herself smiling more than she had in years. One afternoon, they decided to visit a small art supply store Daniel frequented. It was tucked away in a quiet corner of the city, its shelves crammed with paints, brushes, sketchbooks, and other creative tools. As they wandered through the aisles, Daniel enthusiastically pointed out his favorite items, sharing stories about how certain materials had inspired some of his best work. Evie watched him with fascination, marveling at how animated he became when talking about his craft. "You really love what you do, don't you?" she asked, leaning against a shelf stacked with colorful tubes of paint. Daniel nodded, his expression softening. "Yeah, I guess I do. Art is, well, it's kind of my escape. When everything else feels overwhelming, creating something beautiful helps me make sense of things." Evie tilted her head thoughtfully. "That's amazing. Not everyone gets to turn their passion into a career." "Well, it's not exactly a lucrative career," Daniel joked, scratching the back of his neck. "But hey, at least I'm doing what I love, right?" His humility struck a chord in Evie. Here was a man who valued fulfillment over financial success, a concept so foreign to her own life that it almost felt revolutionary. In her world, numbers ruled everything: profit margins, stock prices, quarterly reports. Rarely did anyone pause to consider whether those numbers brought happiness or meaning. Yet Daniel lived by a completely different set of principles, ones that prioritized soul over status. As their friendship deepened, Evie began to notice subtle differences between Daniel's life and hers. For instance, while she traveled and chauffeured cars and stayed in luxury hotels during business trips, Daniel walked everywhere, claiming it helped him clear his mind. While she dined at Michelin-starred restaurants, he preferred hole-in-the-wall eateries where the food was cheap but flavorful. These contrasts fascinated her. She admired how Daniel found joy in simplicity, whereas she often chased complexity without realizing it. Still, Evie couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she was hiding part of herself from him. Every time they met, she reminded herself to stay in character as Evie, the carefree traveler passing through town. But the longer she spent with Daniel, the harder it became to maintain the facade. She wanted to tell him the truth, to reveal the weight of her responsibilities and the loneliness that came with them. Yet fear held her back. What if he saw her differently once he knew? What if the connection they shared dissolved under the pressure of reality? One evening, as they strolled along the riverbank watching the sunset, Evie mustered the courage to broach the subject indirectly. "Do you ever feel like people only see one side of you?" she asked hesitantly. Daniel glanced at her, surprised by the question. "Sure, I think we all put on different versions of ourselves depending on the situation. Why do you ask?" She shrugged, trying to play it off as casual curiosity. "I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if anyone truly knows me, like beyond the surface stuff." Daniel stopped walking and turned to face her, his gaze steady. "I get that, but I think the people who matter will always see the real you no matter what." His words hung in the air, resonating deeply with Evie. She wanted to believe him, to trust that Daniel would accept her for who she was, even if that person wasn't just Evie. But revealing the truth meant risking everything they'd built together, and she wasn't ready to take that leap just yet. Despite her internal conflict, their bond continued to grow stronger. They started spending entire days together, exploring museums, attending concerts, and wandering through farmers' markets. Each outing revealed new layers of their personalities, bringing them closer with every shared experience. Daniel taught Evie how to appreciate the beauty in imperfection, pointing out cracks in sidewalks or faded murals as hidden treasures waiting to be noticed. In return, Evie introduced Daniel to classic novels and philosophical ideas that challenged his perspective on life. Yet as much as Evie cherished these moments, guilt lingered in the corners of her mind. She hated lying to Daniel, even if it was by omission. The more she fell for him, the heavier the burden of her secret became. She knew she couldn't keep pretending forever. Eventually, the truth would come out, and when it did, she prayed Daniel would understand. One rainy Saturday afternoon, they sought refuge in a cozy bookstore, sipping hot chocolate while browsing, shelves filled with dog-eared paperbacks. As they sat together in a quiet corner, Evie felt an overwhelming urge to confide in him. The atmosphere was intimate, the sound of rain tapping against the windows creating a cocoon of privacy. For a fleeting moment, she considered telling him everything, the board meetings, the private jets, the billions in assets. But instead, she settled for a simpler admission. "I really enjoy being around you, Daniel," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the patter of raindrops. "More than I expected to." He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Same here, Evie. You're different, in a good way." Her heart swelled at his words, but the weight of her deception pressed down on her chest. She reached out and touched his hand lightly as if seeking reassurance. "Promise me something." "Anything," he replied without hesitation. "If you ever find out something about me that changes the way you see me, promise you won't judge me too harshly." Daniel frowned slightly, clearly puzzled by her request. "Why would I judge you? You're one of the most genuine people I've ever met." Evie forced a smile, though her insides churned with uncertainty. "Just promise, okay?" "I promise," he said firmly, squeezing her hand. "No matter what." In that moment, Evie realized she was falling in love with him, not because of his kindness or humor or charm, but because of the way he made her feel. With Daniel, she wasn't a CEO or a millionaire. She was simply Evie, a woman navigating the complexities of life alongside someone who saw her for who she truly was. And though she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, she also knew one thing for certain. Letting him go wasn't an option anymore. The cracks in Evelyn's carefully constructed facade began to show one evening, weeks after her confession at the bookstore. She and Daniel had grown inseparable, spending nearly every free moment together. Their connection deepened with each passing day, but the weight of her secret gnawed at Evelyn relentlessly. No matter how hard she tried to push it aside, the guilt lingered like a shadow, growing darker with time. She knew that eventually the truth would come out, and when it did, she feared it might shatter everything they'd built. One lazy Sunday afternoon, Evelyn invited Daniel to her apartment for lunch. It wasn't something she'd planned. It just happened naturally, as their relationship had become more comfortable and familiar. Still, inviting him into her personal space felt significant. Her apartment was luxurious, filled with sleek furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows, and artwork from renowned galleries. It was a stark contrast to Daniel's modest living situation, and Evelyn worried he might sense something was off. When Daniel arrived, he took in the surroundings with wide eyes. "Wow," he said, whistling softly. "This place is incredible. You weren't kidding when you said you liked nice views." Evelyn laughed nervously, brushing off his comment. "Thanks. I got lucky with the location." As they settled into the kitchen, chatting while she prepared sandwiches, Daniel's curiosity seemed piqued. He wandered around the open concept space, glancing at framed photographs on the walls and admiring the minimalist decor. When he spotted a stack of business magazines on the coffee table, his brow furrowed slightly. One magazine featured an article about Evelyn Carter, the very same woman who ran the tech empire everyone talked about. The headline read, "Evelyn Carter, the visionary behind Silicon Valley's biggest success story." Daniel picked up the magazine, flipping through its pages absent-mindedly. At first, he didn't connect the dots. But then, as he studied the photo accompanying the article, a professional headshot of Evelyn dressed in a sharp power suit, he froze. His gaze darted between the picture and Evie standing in the kitchen, her hair tied back casually, wearing an apron splattered with mustard. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then slowly, Daniel set the magazine down and turned to face her. His expression was unreadable, a mix of confusion, surprise, and something else Evelyn couldn't quite place. "Evie?" he asked cautiously, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Is this you?" Evelyn's heart sank. She had dreaded this moment, rehearsed countless ways to explain herself, but now that it was here, all her words evaporated. Instead, she simply nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "Yes," she whispered finally, bracing herself for whatever came next. "That's me." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling to process what he'd just learned. "So, you're not just Evie, are you? You're Evelyn Carter, the CEO, the millionaire, the person everyone talks about like some kind of legend." "I am," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But I swear, Daniel, I never meant to deceive you. I wanted to be someone different for once, someone ordinary." Daniel let out a shaky laugh, pacing across the room. "You could have told me. You didn't have to lie." "I know," Evelyn said quickly, stepping toward him. "And I'm so sorry. I wanted to tell you sooner, but I was scared. Scared that you'd see me differently, that you'd think I was only using you or that our friendship wasn't real." He stopped pacing and looked at her, his frustration softening into something closer to hurt. "Do you really think I'd judge you like that, after everything we've shared?" Evelyn felt tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know. Maybe. I've been judged my whole life for being who I am. People either want to use me or put me on a pedestal. With you, I felt normal. Like I could breathe for the first time in years." Daniel sighed deeply, rubbing the back of his neck. "I get it. Sort of. But you can't keep hiding parts of yourself from people who care about you. That's not fair. To them, or to you." Nodded, swallowing hard. "You're right. And I promise, no more secrets. From now on, you'll know everything." They stood there in silence for a while, the tension between them palpable yet somehow bearable. Finally, Daniel broke the quiet. "Okay," he said softly, "let's start over. Tell me everything." Over the next hour, Evelyn poured her heart out. She explained her rise to success, the sacrifices she'd made along the way, and the loneliness that came with living under constant scrutiny. She told him about the pressure to maintain her image, the endless demands of running a global company, and the fear of being vulnerable with anyone. Through it all, Daniel listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and offering reassurance when needed. By the end of the conversation, both of them felt emotionally drained, but also closer than ever. For the first time, Evelyn allowed herself to be fully seen, flaws and all. And Daniel, instead of pulling away, embraced her honesty. He admitted that learning her true identity had blindsided him, but he understood why she'd done it. More importantly, he believed her when she said their connection mattered more to her than any title or fortune. In the days that followed, their relationship shifted subtly. Now that Daniel knew the truth, Evelyn stopped pretending to be someone she wasn't. She introduced him to her world, not to impress him, but to include him. They attended charity events together, dined at upscale restaurants, and even visited her office building, where employees greeted her with respectful nods. To Evelyn's relief, Daniel handled it all with grace and humor, teasing her about her fancy life while reminding her to stay grounded. At the same time, Evelyn made efforts to step into Daniel's world. She accompanied him to art shows, helped him brainstorm ideas for new projects, and even joined him on long walks through the city. These moments reminded her of why she'd fallen for him in the first place: his authenticity, his passion, and his ability to find joy in the simplest things. However, their newfound transparency didn't shield them from external challenges. Word of their relationship spread quickly among Evelyn's peers, sparking whispers and speculation. Some admired Daniel for winning the affection of such a powerful woman. Others dismissed him as a gold digger or a fleeting distraction. Meanwhile, Daniel's friends expressed concern, warning him about the complications of dating someone so wealthy and influential. They urged him to protect himself, fearing he might get hurt if things went south. Despite the outside noise, Daniel and Evelyn remained committed to making their relationship work. They talked openly about their fears and insecurities, determined to build trust despite their vastly different lives. Evelyn confessed that she worried Daniel might resent her wealth someday, while Daniel admitted he sometimes felt intimidated by her status. But rather than letting these doubts drive them apart, they used them as opportunities to strengthen their bond. One evening, as they sat on the rooftop of Evelyn's building watching the sunset, Daniel turned to her with a serious expression. "You know, I never thought I'd say this, but I think I love you." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. "Really?" "Yeah," he said, smiling faintly. "It's crazy, isn't it? Falling for someone who's basically the opposite of me. But I can't imagine my life without you anymore." Tears welled up in Evelyn's eyes as she reached for his hand. "I feel the same way. And I promise, no matter what happens, I'll always fight for us." Their declaration marked a turning point in their journey. Though challenges lay ahead, they faced them together, united by a love that transcended titles, bank accounts, and societal expectations. For the first time, Evelyn realized that being extraordinary wasn't about achieving success or accumulating wealth. It was about finding someone who saw your soul and loved you anyway. And Daniel, in turn, discovered that true happiness came not from avoiding complexity, but from embracing it alongside the right person. As the weeks turned into months, Daniel and Evelyn found themselves navigating uncharted territory. Their relationship had weathered the initial storm of revelations and doubts, but now they faced a new challenge, proving to each other, and to the world, that their love could endure despite their vastly different lives. It wasn't just about overcoming external pressures. It was about ensuring that their connection remained genuine, untainted by the expectations placed upon them. Evelyn, in particular, felt the weight of her responsibilities more acutely than ever before. Her role as CEO demanded constant attention, from early morning meetings to late-night conference calls. Yet no matter how busy she was, she made a conscious effort to carve out time for Daniel. She learned to delegate tasks, streamline her schedule, and occasionally turn down invitations to high-profile events, all so she could spend an evening at his tiny apartment, eating takeout or wandering through art galleries on weekends. These small sacrifices meant everything to Daniel, who appreciated her efforts without needing grand gestures. For his part, Daniel worked hard to adapt to Evelyn's world without losing himself in the process. He attended charity galas and networking dinners, always dressed in borrowed suits that didn't quite fit right but somehow managed to look charming anyway. At first, he felt out of place among the polished executives and socialites, but over time, he grew more comfortable. His wit and warmth won people over, earning him respect even from those who initially doubted his intentions. Still, there were moments when the opulence of Evelyn's life overwhelmed him, like when she casually mentioned flying private jets or discussed multi-million-dollar deals as if they were grocery lists. In those moments, Daniel reminded himself of what truly mattered, the way Evelyn looked at him, not with awe for her wealth, but with admiration for his character. Despite their best efforts, cracks began to form, not because of any lack of love, but because of the inevitable differences between their worlds. One day, while visiting Evelyn's office, Daniel overheard two employees gossiping about him. They referred to him as the artist boyfriend, their tone dripping with condescension. Though Evelyn later assured him that their opinions didn't matter, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he'd always be seen as an outsider in her circle. Similarly, Evelyn struggled with judgment from Daniel's friends, who warned him that relationships like theirs rarely worked out. "She's living in a completely different reality," one friend said bluntly. "What happens when you realize you're not enough for her?" These comments stung, planting seeds of doubt in both their minds. Evelyn feared that Daniel might eventually feel overshadowed by her success, while Daniel worried that he'd never measure up to the glamorous lifestyle she was accustomed to. Late at night, lying side by side in bed, they'd talk about these fears, their voices low and vulnerable. "I don't want you to change who you are for me," Evelyn said one evening, tracing patterns on Daniel's arm. "I fell in love with you because you're authentic. Don't lose that. And I don't want you to give up your dreams for me," Daniel replied, cupping her face gently. "You've worked too hard to get where you are. I'd never ask you to choose between me and your career." Their conversations often ended with promises to support each other no matter what, but the underlying tension lingered. To combat it, they decided to create traditions that belonged solely to them, rituals that reminded them of why they were together in the first place. Every Saturday morning, they visited a local farmer's market, filling bags with fresh produce and homemade bread. Afterwards, they'd cook brunch together in whichever kitchen they happened to be in, laughing as flour dusted their clothes and eggshells slipped onto the counter. These quiet, ordinary moments became their anchor, grounding them amid the chaos of their public lives. One weekend, Evelyn surprised Daniel with tickets to a weekend getaway in Vermont. The trip was meant to be a break from the city, a chance for them to reconnect away from prying eyes and relentless schedules. As they drove through winding roads surrounded by vibrant autumn foliage, Daniel rolled down the window, letting the crisp air rush past him. "This is nice," he said, glancing at Evelyn with a grin. "No fancy cars, no bodyguards, no paparazzi, just us." Evelyn smiled, gripping the steering wheel loosely. "I thought we could use some time to remember what matters most." When they arrived at the cozy cabin nestled deep in the woods, Daniel immediately set to work building a fire in the hearth while Evelyn unpacked their bags. That night, wrapped in blankets by the flickering flames, they shared stories about their childhoods, their dreams, and the little things that brought them joy. For the first time in months, they felt like equals, not a CEO and an artist, but two people deeply in love. But even paradise has its limits. On the second day of their trip, Evelyn received an urgent call from her assistant. A major client was threatening to pull out of a deal worth millions unless she personally intervened. Torn between staying with Daniel and fulfilling her duty, Evelyn hesitated. Sensing her conflict, Daniel encouraged her to take the call. "Go ahead," he said softly. "You've given me this entire weekend. I'll still be here when you're done." Though grateful for his understanding, Evelyn couldn't ignore the pang of guilt as she stepped outside to handle the situation. By the time she returned, hours later, Daniel was sitting by the lake, skipping stones across the water. He greeted her with a smile, but she could see the faint trace of disappointment in his eyes. "I'm sorry," she said, sitting beside him. "I know this wasn't how you imagined our trip would go." "It's okay," Daniel replied, though his voice betrayed a hint of frustration. "I just wish sometimes your job didn't have to follow us everywhere." Evelyn nodded, her heart heavy. Me too. But this is my life, Daniel. And if we're going to make this work, we need to figure out how to balance it. They spent the rest of the evening discussing ways to navigate their future together. Evelyn suggested hiring someone to manage her schedule more efficiently, allowing her to dedicate specific days solely to Daniel. In return, Daniel promised to be patient, recognizing that her career was as much a part of her identity as his art was of his. Though compromises were difficult, they agreed that their love was worth the effort. Back in the city, they put their plan into action. Evelyn scheduled regular Daniel days, during which she turned off her phone and focused entirely on spending quality time with him. Whether it was exploring hidden bookstores, taking long walks in Central Park, or simply lounging on the couch watching old movies, these moments helped reinforce their bond. Meanwhile, Daniel continued pursuing his passion for art, determined not to rely on Evelyn's wealth. When she offered to fund a solo exhibition for him, he politely declined, insisting that he wanted to succeed on his own terms. Their determination paid off. Slowly but surely, the skepticism surrounding their relationship began to fade. Friends and colleagues alike started to see that their love was built on mutual respect and admiration, not convenience or ambition. Even Evelyn's board members, initially wary of her involvement with someone outside their circle, came to appreciate Daniel's grounded perspective and creative insights. Still, challenges remained. There were days when exhaustion threatened to drive them apart, when misunderstandings flared into arguments, and when the pressure of their circumstances felt unbearable. But through it all, they held on to one truth. They loved each other fiercely, and nothing, not societal expectations, financial disparities, or professional demands, could change that. One evening, as they stood on the rooftop of Evelyn's building watching the city lights twinkle below, Daniel turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever wonder if we're crazy for trying to make this work?" he asked. Evelyn laughed softly, leaning into his embrace. "Maybe. But isn't love supposed to be a little crazy? If it were easy, everyone would do it." Daniel kissed, the top of her head holding her close. "Well then, I guess we're just proving that we're extraordinary after all." And in that moment, surrounded by the hum of the city and the warmth of each other's presence, they realized that love wasn't about avoiding storms, it was about weathering them together. Months passed, and Daniel and Evelyn's relationship continued to evolve. They had learned to navigate the complexities of their worlds, blending them in ways that honored both their individuality and their shared commitment. But Evelyn knew there was still one final step she needed to take, a gesture grand enough to show Daniel just how much he meant to her. She wanted to do something extraordinary, not because it was expected, but because it felt right. The idea came to her during a quiet morning at home. As she sipped her coffee, watching sunlight stream through the windows, Evelyn thought about Daniel's art. Over the years, he had poured his heart into countless pieces, each one telling a story only he could tell. Yet despite his undeniable talent, he had struggled to gain widespread recognition. Galleries were hesitant to showcase unknown artists, and buyers often overlooked his work in favor of more established names. Evelyn knew this frustrated him, though he rarely voiced it. He didn't create art for fame or fortune. He created it because it was who he was. But even so, she wanted to give him the platform he deserved. With that in mind, Evelyn began secretly planning an event unlike anything Daniel had ever experienced. She reached out to her network of contacts, securing a venue in the heart of Manhattan, a sprawling gallery known for hosting high-profile exhibitions. She hired a team of curators to help select and display his best works, ensuring every detail was perfect. She even arranged for live musicians to perform during the evening, creating an atmosphere that would celebrate not just Daniel's art, but the spirit behind it. When everything was ready, Evelyn invited Daniel to what she described as a small gathering at the gallery. He agreed without suspicion, assuming it was another networking event or charity gala she occasionally dragged him to. On the night of the exhibition, Evelyn picked him up in her car, dressed casually to avoid raising any red flags. As they approached the gallery, Daniel noticed the crowd spilling onto the sidewalk. Elegant women in designer dresses, men in tailored suits, photographers snapping photos. Confusion flickered across his face. "Evie, what is all this?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Evelyn smiled mischievously, taking his hand. "Just wait." Inside, the transformation was breathtaking. The walls were adorned with Daniel's artwork, each piece illuminated by soft spotlights. From vibrant cityscapes to intimate portraits, every painting told a chapter of his journey. In the center of the room stood a large sculpture Daniel had created years ago, its intricate details catching the light beautifully. Guests mingled around the displays, discussing the pieces with genuine admiration. A plaque near the entrance read, "Daniel Harper, Stories in Color." Daniel froze, his eyes wide with shock. "Is this mine?" "It's yours," Evelyn confirmed, squeezing his hand. "I wanted the world to see what I've seen all along, the beauty, the passion, the soul you put into your work." For a moment, Daniel couldn't speak. Emotions swirled inside him, gratitude, awe, humility, all wrapped in the overwhelming realization that Evelyn had done this for him. Not for herself, not for publicity, but because she believed in him. "You didn't have to do this," he finally managed, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I did," Evelyn replied softly, "because you deserve it, because you inspire me every single day, and because I love you." Tears welled up in Daniel's eyes as he pulled her into a tight embrace. The noise of the crowd faded into the background. All that mattered was the two of them, standing together amidst his creations. That night, surrounded by friends, strangers, and admirers, Daniel felt truly seen, not just as an artist, but as a person. As the evening unfolded, guests approached Daniel to congratulate him, sharing heartfelt compliments about his work. Collectors expressed interest in purchasing pieces, while critics praised the raw honesty of his style. For the first time, Daniel allowed himself to imagine a future where his art might reach people beyond his immediate circle. It wasn't about validation. It was about knowing that his voice mattered. Later, when the crowd thinned and the lights dimmed, Evelyn led Daniel to a quiet corner of the gallery. There, beneath a spotlight, hung one final piece. A portrait of Evelyn herself. It was unlike anything he'd painted before, soft yet striking, capturing her essence in a way words never could. Beneath it, a small note read, "To Evie, who taught me to believe in myself. Thank you for seeing me." Evelyn stared at the painting, tears streaming down her face. "When did you—" "I started working on it after our trip to Vermont," Daniel admitted, his cheeks flushing slightly. "I wanted to capture how I see you, not as the powerful CEO, but as the woman who makes me feel like I can conquer anything." They stood there silently, gazing at the portrait, letting its significance sink in. In that moment, they understood something profound. Their love wasn't defined by wealth, status, or titles. It was built on mutual respect, unwavering support, and the courage to embrace each other's differences. In the months that followed, Daniel's career skyrocketed. His work gained international acclaim, appearing in galleries and publications worldwide. Yet despite his newfound success, he remained grounded, crediting Evelyn for giving him the confidence to chase his dreams. Evelyn, too, found joy in stepping away from the relentless grind of corporate life, rediscovering passions she'd long neglected. Together, they proved that love wasn't about finding someone exactly like you. It was about finding someone who challenged you, inspired you, and made you better. One crisp autumn afternoon, as they strolled through Central Park hand in hand, Daniel turned to Evelyn with a playful grin. "You know, I think we're rewriting the rules." "What rules?" Evelyn asked, raising an eyebrow. "The ones that say people like us aren't supposed to end up together," Daniel replied. "We're living proof that love doesn't care about bank accounts or boardrooms. It cares about hearts." Evelyn laughed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Well, if anyone tries to argue with us, we'll just point to tonight's headlines. Artist and CEO prove love conquers all." They shared a laugh, the sound echoing through the park as leaves swirled around them. Though their journey had been far from easy, they had emerged stronger, wiser, and more deeply connected than ever before. Their story served as a reminder that true love wasn't about perfection. It was about choosing each other again and again, no matter the obstacles. And as they walked off into the golden glow of the setting sun, Daniel and Evelyn knew one thing for certain. They weren't just ordinary people, they were extraordinary together.